Ladies and gentlemen, in this Red Gaming Silicon video, let us discuss resolution and frame rate regarding Thief. Now, resolution and frame rate have definitely been a huge topic in regards to the next generation consoles. Many gamers had, of course, expected 1080p and 60 frames per second, and honestly speaking, for a lot of titles, we've just not seen it. And so, instead, we've been quite happy in most cases with a locked 30 FPS, which, for the most part, in most games, does give you a fairly decent gaming experience. Now, the lead level designer, Daniel Winfield Schmidt, was discussing the resolution and the frame rate issues regarding the game, and he has said, and I quote, "It's a little too early to talk about specifics just yet, although the team are pushing to have the highest resolution and frame rates as possible for all platforms." That's obviously, end quote by the way, that's fairly obvious. I mean, no one's going to be like, okay, you know what, we want to make our game look as worse as possible. But the problem with a game like Thief is it has a fairly persistent gaming world, and they want to remain fairly true to the original. So, one example they gave was, for example, the light and dark mechanics, the bow, the arrowheads, and so on all have to remain from the original title. Plus, they're cool to use, so it's an easy choice. We've kept that in, so you can complete Thief without knocking anyone out or killing anyone. And so you can focus on stealing. And we didn't fall into temptation to just force players to shoot anyone or to do anything in that direction. We want to make sure that the standalone experience that was Thief in the original is still retained in this version of Thief. Now, those little tidbits, for example, the light and dark, the ability to see, for example, arrows, and for those arrows and guards and so on, the dead bodies to remain there, it actually does take quite a lot of processing power and memory. In other words, the game engine has to, while you're in that area, so obviously after you've exited the level, that doesn't really matter, but if you're in a certain area and you KO a guard, that has to remain there. That can't just disappear from memory. It's not as magical. You know, it's not a magical fantasy land. It has to actually, you know, keep in the memory. And little things like that eat up a lot of not only memory but also processing power as well, particularly when we're going to be dealing a game with so many physical effects on lighting. Lighting in this game is going to be extremely intensive. The PC version in particular apparently is going to be having even better texture quality, even better lighting quality than the consoles from what the developers are telling us. It's also fair to remember that it doesn't sound that big of a deal. Okay, well, why can't you just optimize the game from 30 to 60? You know, it sounds like a lot of people don't really, you know, think when they go through that process in their mind. They say, oh, okay, well, all we have to do is optimize. You know, all the games developers, why didn't they optimize it enough? And this isn't really a fault of the game's developers in many cases. Obviously, if it's an indie game or a game that doesn't have heavy graphical effects, that's one thing, but the reality of the matter is it really comes down to the platform and the hardware that you're using. If you've got like a vision and a direction that you want to go with the game, in other words, you need heavy emphasis on quality, you need great lighting, you need great textures, you need advanced AI, all of this stuff. And remember now that some of this is going to be coming off of the GPU compute, which, despite the fact that, for example, the PlayStation 4 has a great GPU flow in terms of the GPU, which is general purpose computing on the graphics card, it ultimately is putting further strain on the system. And yes, they can start farming that off, but even so, the system has to deal with that. And to just say that, you know, we expect all games to be 1080p 60 FPS, I'm sure that games developers in their perfect scenario would definitely like to do that because it's appeasing the audience. The reality of the matter is, however, 30 to 60 is quite literally asking the GPU, hey, you know what, you're going to be doing double the work. Because ultimately, all you're seeing is a frame of animation. It's almost like, to give you a great visual example of this, think of it as like one of the old Warner Brothers cartoons, for example. And, you know, some of those cases, they had to be hand-drawn or whatever they were doing to create that animation. Obviously, that's all about frame rate. And so with the GPU, it actually has to physically render things and Quite simply put, if you've got a situation where you're targeting 30 frames per second, that means that the GPU has significantly longer to render. It has twice the amount of physical time to render each individual frame of animation. And the Xbox One in particular has had some blows on it, almost like the audience smashing it with a sledgehammer because of the lack of GPU power in the Xbox One. It has roughly 1.32 T-flops, which is considerably less than the PS4, but even so, the PS4, it's not as powerful, and you know, as I've personally said this before, but also games developers as well have said this. For example, the Samaritan demo from Epic, which has stated it, you know, they wanted about 2.5. That was created on a system that had 2.5 T-flops of computing power, and that was really what the next generation of hardware that they were kind of hoping for. That obviously, you know, they maybe 2.2, 2.3, they certainly wanted over 2 T-flops, and the PlayStation 4 wasn't quite yet there. I mean, it's possible maybe in the future that more power can be unlocked. Maybe we'll have a BIOS update, for example, or a system update which increases the GPU clock speed, and certainly if it was to go up slightly, then simply because of the amount of GCN cores on the PS4, then definitely we would see a corresponding increase of T-flops, but, or should I say G-flops, which might push it over to 2, but even so, 2.2, it's not really going to make much of a difference on a game like this. You know, even 10 or 15% extra GPU power isn't going to be enough to run a game like this at 60 FPS at all times. It's just not. And so that's just kind of something we're going to have to understand and kind of live with, I think. Anyway, this has been a little bit of a ranty video, so not necessarily ranty, but a little bit of a tangent. Let's go with a tangent. Anyway, I'll hopefully see you guys soon. Take care. Bye for now.